While some of the men are led away, beaten as they go, another was singled out. It hasn't been possible to establish how many victims of this night lived or died. This was all filmed by a European cameraman. He says 14 minutes later, there was yet another dimension to the violence. Gunfire on the bridge aimed at anti-government protesters. A laser picks out individuals. This round finds its target. It can't be established at this stage who fired these shots, just as it isn't possible to identify victims or their attackers. The questions over last Wednesday night, Thursday morning, linger. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
Well, 14 days and counting. Is protest fatigue in Egypt setting in? We're in Cairo's Liberation Square to find out how demonstrators are keeping their spirits up. Plus, cleaning up after the deluge, Sri Lankans try to rebuild their lives devastated by recent floods.
As a slight chill spreads across Melbourne, we'll find a way to perk you up.
Hello, we have the chance of a few spots of rain to come across northern parts of the Arabian Peninsula. A little bit of cloud just flirting with us here. That's in the process of pulling away. We may just see a little bit of damp weather across northern parts of the Gulf, more especially into Kuwait, into Iraq. To the south of this line, it should stay dry and fine. Temperatures at around 24 Celsius here in Doha and also for Abu Dhabi. Those temperatures starting to push up a little bit as that rain just nudges its way across the Gulf into Iran. So it will turn a rather unsettled here. Some bits and pieces of rain, maybe some sleet and snow too into the far north of India. But down to the south, that's where the real weather action remains. Further flooding rains coming back in across Sri Lanka. Still no sign of any let up in the flood conditions that we have here. The rain has eased meanwhile across a good part of southern Africa. Pockets of heavy rain just towards Drakensberg Mountains into Mozambique, into Tanzania. More very heavy showers to come once again across a good part of Madagascar. Signs of the rain easing at last, I'm pleased to say, for Rio de Janeiro. It's largely fine and dry here over the next day or so. Rio at 30 degrees Celsius. You can see where the really wet weather is. That's down across Uruguay into the far north of Argentina. Buenos Aires should stay fine and dry. Cloud clearing away here, 30 degrees.
Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
As Washington's allies stumble, one after the other, exposed, losing control and influence, powerless in the face of the people's power, we ask, is this the dawn of a new Middle East? Empire at this time on Al Jazeera.
Hello again, you're watching Al Jazeera. Our top stories. Southern Sudan has voted overwhelmingly to break away from the north. Official results confirm that more than 98% of voters back secession. But Africa's newest nation will not be created until July. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been in courts in the United Kingdom to fight extradition to Sweden over claims of sexual assault. His defense lawyer says he could face the death penalty if Assange is sent to the United States on separate charges relating to the whistleblowing website. And protests have continued across Egypt for a 14th day. There have been calls for another big march on Tuesday. This as the nation's government decided to give state employees a 15% salary hike. Well, with protests now stretching into a second week, there are worries in the pro-democracy camp that fatigue is setting in. Protesters are doing all they can to keep spirits up in the epicenter of the movement, which is Liberation Square. Shireen Tadros sent this report.
For years, he's been censored and silenced. Now, journalist Sharif Araf says he and his colleagues will tell the truth using their new paper called Liberation Square. And the protesters are hungry for it.
For the government, this is an illegal newspaper, but it gets its authority from the Egyptian people. I'm giving it out to people without money because they have paid with their lives for this freedom of the press.
The square has become a mini utopia in central Cairo. Political opinions aired, gender and sectarian divisions nowhere to be found. People feed and clothe each other here. Medical areas have been set up by doctors joining in with the protesters. The crime and sexual harassment so prevalent in the country seems absent in this square. So this is essentially the lost and found area, and people have been handing in all sorts of things, from ID cards that they found lying about to mobile phones, sunglasses. Some people have even come and handed in money and coins that they found just lying about. And it's all being protected by the protesters themselves, who have formed this human chain around this area to make sure nobody comes in and tries to take that's been found. But as the days drag on, tension grows. Organisers worried about infiltrators hostile to their cause are becoming increasingly suspicious of those coming in and those filming in the square.
We are preparing for everything and are afraid of anything that could spoil this revolution. People enter the square, but we don't know if they are with us or not. So we need to tighten the security.
Keeping the momentum going is key to this uprising. There are constant events to entertain and rally people. The more the government appears to be giving in to the demands of the protesters, the more ordinary Egyptians start to question the necessity of the sit-in. For those here, though, any change whilst Hosni Mubarak stays in power is cosmetic. And their message to the president is clear. Shireen Tadros, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
Well, let's speak to Aaron David Miller in Washington, D.C. He's a former U.S. advisor on Middle East policy, currently a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Welcome to the programme, Mr. Miller. It'd be very interesting to get your thoughts on the current state of play. First of all, the crowds out in Liberation Square, they're still there and they're massive, but the pressure is growing, isn't it? Not just from the government, from the army, but also from employers who are demanding their staff come back, and probably families too.
I would think. I mean, I think the regime has very skillfully divided the opposition through an initial series of meetings, offers of government subsidies to state employees, and the reality that the vast majority of the Egyptian people, 80 million or so, strikes me as I'm not at all sure where they stand. And the passion for stability and normalcy, return to normalcy, seems to me outweighs whatever dislike or even hatred most Egyptians may feel toward their current president. So I think the pressures will, in fact, move toward a political deal of some sort.
But given the many millions that we've seen out in the streets in the last 2 weeks, that just demonstrates an unprecedented level of discontent, almost certainly right across the country. There's no question about that.
Yeah, but the question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Egypt is a military state. It's a Praetorian state. The military essentially dominates both the security, the political, and large sectors of the economy in terms of businesses and industries that they own. So the reality is, what do you do if, in effect, the opposition can't run the country, it can't launch a sustained opposition to take it over, and the military, up until now, continues to support a transition, which presumably would see the president leave at the end of that transition. And the United States is trying to square a circle here. So I don't see what alternative there is right now to continuation of this stalemate until one side or the other basically says we've had enough.
So you're saying that the vision, if you like, of what the demonstrators want is a million miles from what the reality will be, even when Mubarak goes, may that be sooner or later?
Right. I mean, I think that is absolutely the central question. The issue is not when Mubarak goes or under what circumstances. The issue in the end is this: can a politically democratizing force in quest of a more transparent, accountable government, more human rights or respect for human rights, a vibrant parliament, can it wrest power from a Praetorian state, a military state, which has dominated that state and continues to dominate it? That's the question. And will a new military political contract be negotiated between those in the streets and presumably the millions whose hopes and aspirations they embody, and the traditional institutions of power? Every president, every political leader that has run this country has at one point or another worn a uniform. That's the key question.
And that brings us back full circle, doesn't it? Because it's then a question of what happens on the street and what the